difficult to push back on police power. And when
he says police unions
whether
lobby
elected
for
leaders or private citizens begin
police
to push
bill of
back,
rights,
what they find is actually
separate rights for police. Not equal rights, but separate special rights for police.
And city officials, elected officials, have had their tires slashed, have been threatened, with violence. There have been cities that had to declare bankruptcy and financial emergencies to even begin to think about pushing back on police budgets. And of course, de Blasio, who I have no love for, is a great example of someone who, without even really beginning to seriously threaten police power, was targeted, was harassed. His children were harassed. The city was, bullied essentially to give the police whatever they want, because
like
this
terrorists.
is what the police do, and they operate, as I argue in the book, as a gang, as a protection racket that doesn't actually protect,
and as terrorists,
this is
terrorize.
the reason that they need to be abolished, because there's no possibility of reforming the
Thank you. Good call. Abolish the police. Don't just cash them out. Abolish the police. Replace the police.
That's the epicenter, if you will, of
Black Panthers, scab police, police the police, however you want to do it.
Racial justice and trying to hold police accountable. You point out in your book, you point out that moment when a very angry group of protesters took on police power in a collective way, in a way that was quite violent, in a way that maybe indicated the desperation that they feel from being unable to break police power. Why is Minneapolis such an important example? And then all of those incidents and policies that are attempted to be enacted in the city afterwards in terms of defunding the police. What does the example of Minneapolis teach us?
I think, as we know very well, that when the citizens of Minneapolis stood up with bravery, with dedication, they proved, to the world how serious this question was. They helped to spark rebellions and resistance nationwide. For example, where I live in Philadelphia, there was a mass rebellion in response to the Minneapolis rebellions, and global responses, the tearing down of statues of colonizers, of slave masters worldwide, all based on the brave example of what happened in the streets of Minneapolis. And yes, the burning down of the 3rd Precinct was a great example of that. Why? Because
but is Dylan Shakespeare out of jail?
The majority of those polled said that it was a pretty reasonable response, a very direct response to the infliction of violence on the Black community.
Is Dylan Shakespeare out of jail for self-defense against the police like Kyle was?
Immediately,
even though Kyle's a terrorist,
which was backed up by the city council of Minneapolis, was stalled. It was stalled
just one of their terrorists.
The commission, that oversees the reform of the charter in the city, and we saw finally 1 year later, after the city was bullied for a full year into accepting the police, into not voting to abolish the police, the city still 1 year later almost voted to dismantle the Minneapolis police. And I think we should take that as a pretty powerful indication that
try again, get it done,
is necessary and is coming soon. But the main thing is to understand that Minneapolis also comes at the head of and as the culmination of long waves of resistance. We're talking about Trayvon Martin, of course, we're talking about Oscar Grant, we're talking about, in the immediate context, Breonna Taylor at Arbery, and we're talking about a moment in which
McClain,
organizers who have been
and more
here
in Denver
for years now have developed a new language for the defunding and ultimately the abolition of the police, and push that language into the mainstream. This is precisely what's new about Minneapolis, and this is why we're talking about defunding today. It is only, and this is a consistent phenomenon, it is only because of the bravery of people in the streets that we're actually.
Thank you, American heroes.
And of course, we have to talk about.
Thank you, all anti-police brutality protesters.
Police towards strengthening communities as part of what abolition requires. So, what did Minneapolis offer in terms of a teaching moment for other localities, for other cities, and even for a future Minneapolis with perhaps a different city council or a different dynamic around police unions?
Put Frank Nitty on your city council, or Frank Nitty for mayor.
Doing that work, because as you were saying, there was a moment when the institution of slavery seemed, accepted, and it was unimaginable that it would no longer be. And it is possible to imagine a world without police, and stepping into that
Same
requires
dream. The real American dream, real freedom for people, not just white supremacy.